Join the Karen Stories Zone, like, subscribe, and remember, Karen is always watching. Imagine working in a company, doing everything right, following the rules, and suddenly, one small mistake. A missed update. A tiny glitch in the system that no one notices at first. But what if that one little mistake, the kind of thing that you would probably forget about the next day, led to the exposure of one of the biggest tech conspiracies the world has ever seen? Rachel, a sharp and ambitious young security engineer, had always prided herself on being meticulous. She was the kind of person who triple-checked everything, who stayed late to make sure nothing went wrong. But one day, while handling a routine task in her company's security systems, she overlooked a simple yet crucial software update. It seemed harmless at the time, nothing more than a minor oversight in a sea of complex operations. A small error in the grand scheme of things. Surely, it wouldn't be noticed. Who could blame her? After all, it was just one of those things that happens when you're working with massive amounts of data, constantly under pressure. For weeks, the mistake seemed like a non-issue. No alarms were triggered, no complaints came through. But, as days passed, something started to feel off. Rachel began noticing strange behavior at the company. Higher-ups were acting unusually cautious, running secretive meetings behind closed doors. Staff who had been working in the company for years were being moved around, relocated to different departments, or quietly let go. It didn't make sense. Something was wrong. Something was being hidden. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about a missed update. There were whispers in the hallways, rumors that things weren't as smooth in the company as they appeared. The employees who had been quietly let go never got a clear explanation, and those who stayed were now being asked to work under even tighter supervision. It wasn't until one late night, while Rachel was going over some security logs, that she discovered something that would change everything. There it was, hidden in the system, right where it shouldn't have been, a massive data leak. The error she'd overlooked had left a backdoor open, allowing personal data from millions of customers to be exposed. But that wasn't all. It seemed like the company had done everything they could to cover it up. The records were altered, the leak was erased from the system, and the entire incident was buried under layers of corporate bureaucracy. The deeper Rachel dug, the more she uncovered. Hidden in the logs were signs of financial manipulation, inflated client numbers, doctored reports, and inflated contracts that secured billions for the company. They had been lying to investors, manipulating the data to look like they were growing when, in reality, they were on the brink of collapse. Rachel's stomach sank as the pieces fell into place. The tech giant she had been working for wasn't just careless, it was corrupt to its core. At first, Rachel didn't want to believe it. She told herself it couldn't be true. But the more she uncovered, the more the evidence became undeniable. What had started as a simple, almost inconsequential mistake had now turned into something much darker, something bigger than Rachel ever expected. The company wasn't just trying to cover up a simple data breach. It was hiding a web of lies, financial fraud, and manipulation that could destroy everything they had built. And Rachel, unknowingly, was at the center of it all. Her small mistake had exposed the cracks in the company's carefully crafted empire. They had covered up the breach, yes, but they also buried the truth, until now. She had a choice to make: ignore it, stay quiet, and keep her job, or speak up, expose the truth, and risk everything. The stakes were higher than ever, and Rachel knew that if she stayed silent, she would be complicit in the very corruption she had uncovered. But Rachel wasn't the type to let things slide. She couldn't just walk away from this. It was time to take action. She had to make the decision: expose the truth and bring the tech giant to its knees, or let it continue to operate in the shadows, free from the consequences of its actions. And in that moment, Rachel knew she couldn't stay silent. It was time to make the company face the consequences of its actions, no matter the cost. Rachel's decision was made, but the path ahead wasn't going to be easy. She knew that exposing the truth would mean risking everything: her job, her career, and possibly her safety. The company's power reached far and wide, and their ability to silence those who crossed them was well documented. But in that moment, all she could think about was the injustice she had uncovered. The hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, of customers whose data had been stolen and manipulated for corporate gain. She couldn't sit back and let that happen. But where to start? Rachel couldn't just walk out of the office with a folder full of incriminating documents. That would be the first thing the company would look for. Instead, she needed to be strategic. She began by quietly collecting evidence, making sure to keep a low profile. Every piece of information she found, every conversation she overheard, she saved, tucked away safely in encrypted files. It was a slow, methodical process. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Rachel knew she had to act carefully. The company's executives were ruthless. They had the resources to trace anything back to her if they even suspected she was involved. One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. She spent countless nights researching how to expose a corporation of this scale without getting caught. She read articles, spoke to people who had previously worked in whistleblowing cases, and even looked into legal protections for those who dared to expose corporate corruption. It wasn't until she came across an online whistleblower community that she started to feel a sense of hope. The forum was full of people who had successfully exposed corporate wrongdoing, though not without a cost. They offered tips and shared stories, helping Rachel navigate the dangerous waters she was about to enter. It was here that she learned the importance of anonymity, the need to cover her tracks, and how to secure the data before anyone could trace it back to her. Rachel's first step was to find a reliable, trustworthy journalist. She couldn't expose the truth on her own. She needed someone with the platform and credibility to make the story impossible to ignore. She reached out to a journalist who had written extensively on corporate corruption, a name Rachel recognized from the articles she'd read. It was a gamble. If the journalist was compromised or the message was intercepted, everything would be exposed. To her relief, the journalist responded quickly. After a few exchanges, Rachel knew she had found someone who was willing to dig deeper, someone who had the courage to take on the tech giant. They arranged to meet in a secure location, away from prying eyes. Rachel transferred all the evidence she had gathered, company emails, doctored reports, data logs, and customer information, onto a secure drive and handed it over to the journalist. It was the moment of no return. Rachel felt the weight of everything she had done. She had exposed herself. She had trusted someone else with the information that could bring down a multi-billion-dollar company. The truth was now in the open, and there was no going back. But as she left the meeting, her heart was heavy with the knowledge that the company's secrets were no longer hers to protect. The journalist began their investigation immediately. They ran independent checks on the data, verified the authenticity of the documents, and reached out to other former employees who had been silenced or forced out. The story began to take shape, an in-depth investigation into the corrupt practices of the tech giant that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Rachel watched in suspense as the first articles started to surface online. The headlines were shocking. Tech giant hides massive data breach while manipulating customer information, hundreds of thousands of users exposed in company cover-up, corporate fraud exposed in largest data scandal in years. The more Rachel saw, the more she knew there was no turning back. But with every article that came out, the pressure on the company grew. The executives scrambled to contain the damage, issuing public apologies, denying any wrongdoing, and offering vague promises of accountability. But Rachel knew the truth couldn't be hidden anymore. The more the company tried to cover it up, the more people started to ask questions. Lawyers began to gather, lawsuits were filed, and customers demanded answers. The story was gaining momentum. The tech giant had no choice but to launch an internal investigation. As the investigation into the company's practices gained traction, Rachel's life started to spiral into chaos. She received anonymous threats, and her phone was bombarded with messages warning her to stay silent. The company wasn't going to let her go without a fight. But Rachel was determined. She couldn't back down. She had exposed the truth, and no matter the personal cost, she couldn't let the company win. She went into hiding, knowing that it was only a matter of time before the company's lawyers and private investigators came looking for her. Meanwhile, the journalist continued to dig deeper. The investigation soon uncovered more evidence of financial fraud, illegal contracts, and manipulation of customer data. The company's top executives were being called in for questioning, and public pressure mounted. The media frenzy didn't stop. It only grew louder, more intense. Rachel's brave decision to expose the truth had set off a chain reaction that no one, not even the executives of the tech giant, could control. The company's empire, built on lies and deceit, was starting to crumble. What started as a simple mistake, a single overlooked software update, had now evolved into a massive corporate scandal that shook the world. As the company faced the consequences of its actions, Rachel couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. She had done it. The truth was out. The powerful corporation that had once seemed invincible was now on the verge of collapse. And though her life had been turned upside down in the process, Rachel knew one thing for certain. She had done the right thing. She had brought the truth to light, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The fallout from the exposure was swift and brutal. The tech giant, once a towering force in the industry, now found itself at the mercy of public scrutiny. As the media continued to report on the scandal, the company's stock prices plummeted, and investors started to pull out. Lawsuits were filed, customers demanded refunds, and government regulators began investigating. The company's reputation, built over years of innovation and dominance, was now in tatters, with every new revelation adding more weight to the burden it had to carry. Rachel, still in hiding, watched the unraveling of the corporation with mixed emotions. She had brought the truth to light, but the personal cost was high. Her career in tech was over. She could never return to the industry without facing scrutiny and potential legal consequences. Despite the risk, Rachel knew she had made the right choice. Her actions had exposed a system built on deception, and in doing so, she had helped hold those responsible accountable for their actions. As time passed, Rachel's story became an example of courage and integrity. She received messages from other whistleblowers, some who had been too afraid to speak up until now, and others who had faced similar corporate corruption. They all reached out to thank her for showing them that one person's voice could make a difference, that the truth could still be heard above the noise of corporate greed. Her decision to take a stand had sparked a movement, a ripple effect in the tech world that could not be ignored. In the end, the executives responsible for the cover-up were arrested. Some faced criminal charges, while others were forced to resign under pressure. The tech giant was forced to make massive changes to its internal operations, and strict regulations were imposed on the handling of customer data. The scandal changed the industry, forcing other companies to rethink their practices and become more transparent with their customers. For Rachel, though, the battle was not over. She had achieved justice, but it came at a cost. As the story settled into history, Rachel found herself at a crossroads. She had exposed a corporation's darkest secrets, but she had also lost a part of herself in the process. The life she had known was gone. Yet, despite the hardships, Rachel held her head high. She had done what others wouldn't dare. She had stood up against a corporate empire, and in doing so, she had proven that one person, no matter how small or insignificant they seemed, could change the world. She couldn't go back to the life she once knew. But the fight had made her stronger. The truth had set her free in ways she hadn't expected. And as the years went on, Rachel became a symbol, a reminder that no matter how powerful a corporation might seem, the truth is always there, waiting to be revealed. Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to risk everything to expose it. And for Rachel, the journey had only just begun.